Okay, well, my name is Liv. I'm from Beth Ventures, and I'm joined today with Elin from Aparito. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for inviting me.
I guess we'll get straight to it. I'd love to hear a little bit about where the idea for Aparito came from. Like, where did it all begin?
Yeah, so my background started in children's nursing at Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital. And I got involved from moving from clinical care to sort of clinical trial care and looked after children in around 20 different pharmaceutical funded clinical trials across 4 different therapeutic areas. And got first-hand experience of how difficult and challenging it was for children and families to take part in clinical trials, especially when they were living with a life-limiting or life-threatening illness. And then I moved away from clinical to work as a regulator at the European Medicine Agency, that's sort of responsible for licensing new medicines coming through. And I was part of the pediatrics team. And both from a clinical and regulatory point of view, I realized how difficult it was to generate meaningful data that conveyed what was important to patients, but also demonstrated the efficacy and safety of medicines. And so while Aparito is only 7 years old, the idea from what I'm trying to achieve is probably more like 18 plus years old, because it stems back to very much my clinical frustrations of supporting patients through clinical trials.
That's amazing. My previous job was actually at Great Ormond Street Hospital, so we have a bit of a shared history
Ah,
there.
so you'll
Um,
know what I mean.
um, what exactly do you hope Aparito will change then?
So I want to change the clinical trial experience for patients. I really want to flip it on its head and enable that clinical trials are taken to the patients, and that we don't, bring patients to clinical trials, so that it's available to everybody, whether you live close to specialist centres or whether you live remotely in a country that doesn't have the specialist teams. That we give you the opportunity, particularly when you're living with life limiting or life threatening illnesses, and to sort of live and breathe the mantra of patient centric clinical trial designs.
Amazing. And this is maybe two different types of people, but who exactly are you hoping your venture will help, and who is it designed for?
Yeah, so the life science drug development sort of landscape, I guess it's a bit of a complicated one. Pharmaceutical companies or biotech companies usually pay for it. They usually sponsor the cost of clinical trials
Mm.
and fund the R&D. Clinicians then, recruit their patients and monitor their patients and get excited about the science and the opportunities that these drugs, so the clinicians are a really instrumental part of it. But the regulators then, want to be sure that the drugs are safe and efficacious. And of course, then it's the patients that need to be not only able to take the medicine, but actually also able to take part in the test, the assessment, and hopefully, or most importantly, see some clinically meaningful change for them. And in some ways, our solution is designed for all of those players. But I do say that if we can address the needs of the patient first and foremost, in terms of evaluating the right outcome measures in a right way, then the regulators get assurance that they've got the good data. The clinicians get to see the benefit of supporting their patients more easily through clinical trials, and the pharmaceutical companies then get better recruitment, better retention rates, and faster drugs to market.
I think that's an amazing description of all the different kind of players that are involved with healthcare, like, and focusing on patients in a way to kind of affect all that change. I think that's amazing. Are there any particular success stories or any testimonies that you can share about the impact you've had?
Yeah, so as I say, we sort of Aparis is now 7 years old. We have patients in pretty much 4 corners of the world. We've got patients in Japan, South Africa, across North America, Europe. And it really varies. So on one level, we've got ultra rare diseases where we're looking at gene therapy that's administered directly into the brain, and we follow patients for up to 5 years after. And then at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we more recently been involved in long COVID studies, and aiming to recruit up towards 20,000 patients with long COVID. And so the application, while my background and motivation was in pediatrics and rare diseases, it actually does have applications much further afield as well.
I do remember seeing about the long COVID studies, and from that starting point to having an impact there, it's amazing how far it can go. As you said, Aparito, at least the company, is 7 years old. Obviously, the idea is a lot longer. What's one thing you wish you had known at the beginning of your startup journey?
Oh, I guess there's so many things.
Yeah.
I think that for me, if I'm honest, naivety was bliss. I didn't, necessarily set up to be an entrepreneur. I didn't set up to be sort of on the startup journey. I just wanted a legal entity that I could operate and do my own thing in, that wasn't required, to be part of an academic institution or a pharmaceutical institution or a regulatory, because I felt they were so big and difficult to get changes that and so naivety was definitely bliss in that regard, and I often wonder if I'd have known what it entailed, I possibly wouldn't have started. But I think there's just a completely different different chapters, and as you go through the different chapters, you need to be aware of different things, and you sort of become a jack of all trades, master of none, because you need to be able to switch from discussing IP legal issues of your contracting to financial kind of investment, and to staff recruitment and staff management and performance review, and quite really difficult kind of times with building a team. So so many, but I guess you sort of find a way through it when the need to know that piece comes along.
Someone once told me that the ending of jack of all trades and master of none is better than master of one, which I think is very true for startups. You have to wear many hats. It's a nice way of looking at it. So with all those different chapters and all the things you've had to kind of learn and do, what do you think has been the hardest lesson you've had to learn?
I think there's two, if I'm honest. I don't know if I'm allowed to have two.
We'll allow to.
Okay. So one is that cash is king. It didn't matter how excited I was about the idea. It didn't matter how much social impact I was trying to achieve, or how well received it was from the patient community. When you don't have cash to pay employees' salaries, when you can't persuade investors to invest in you, it's a really lonely, difficult place to be in. And that just sort of can just be quite soul destroying. And then later on, as the money start rolling in, you realize that money makes money, and all of a sudden it's much easier to get money from all sort of sources. And it's a bit, I guess, like you wait for ages for one bus to come along, and then three come along at once, and you don't need all three buses anymore, and you desperately needed it before and it just was not available. And I think that was hard. Particularly for me, I was a real civil servant. I was a nurse, an academic, a regulator, and so this sort of commercial industry, putting a price tag on everything, was quite a difficult one for me to readjust to. And then the second one is just building the team. Found it incredibly difficult. As a startup, it's constantly changing, and you're going through different phases of what you need and how you need it, and just being able to sort of do the performance manager review when you're running at 110 miles per hour, to nurture the great individuals that do come through, and then sort of and that people management leadership skill is really hard. And I describe it as, I don't know if you followed rugby much, but when you're playing 15 rugby, you've got the same size pitch as when you're playing sevens rugby. And obviously in a startup, you're covering the same amount of pitch size, but with less than half the team players. And it's running a faster intensity game. But the problem with that then is every single player is left a bit exposed, because when they're doing really well, everybody can see, but actually when they're really struggling, it's even more visible. And then that creates a lot of tension and frustration. And, much like on the rugby pitch, if things aren't going well, sometimes, the retaliation and stuff can be quite outstanding. And so that for me is really knocked me for six in terms of how difficult that is.
I have never heard it described as a rugby analogy, but I really, really like that. I think that's a really visual way of seeing how much work and what it's like being in a startup, especially in the early days.
Especially for me as a more of a prop forward 15s player, the horror of playing sevens at that fast paced sort of running thing, and being very mindful that you're very exposed to every single missed tackle or sidestep, or is just constant.
So you've gone through so many different challenges I'm just going to say overcome, but are constantly overcoming to grow the business. What do you think are the three qualities that makes for a successful entrepreneur?
Perseverance. You really just need to keep going. Resilience. You need an incredibly thick skin, because it's quite brutal at times. You've got everybody. It's quite a lonely place, and so you definitely need to be resilient and thick skinned to take all the battering that sometimes feels to be coming your way. And then I think if you're an optimist, and forever try and find the positive optimism in something, then that helps you get through. It's very easy to get dragged down by the negativity, to have all your emotions kind of sapped away with constant kind of issues or bugs or staff performance. And maintaining some optimism and positivity helps no end.
I like to think that in the Tech for Good ecosystem, we're all hopefully positives, or have got some optimism in us. We all believe that technology has the potential to create positive impact. Aside from Aparito, are there any other Tech for Good companies that you admire or you think are doing a really great job in the world?
Yeah, I came across one called Me Too, and not sort of the Me Too campaign, but Me Too for supporting young people with mental health to have a safe platform. And I was really inspired by that one recently, which was great to see. And of course, I've been following the BGV alumni and seeing the new ones come through. So it's always very inspiring to see all the different thoughts and ideas that come through, which is excellent. And two others I met recently via Nesta was chocolate making, I think, by children or adults with autism. And that was just brilliant, not necessarily the tech focus side of things, but then also a platform to enable Black and minority ethnic groups to have access to investment funds. As a female founder, I can absolutely relate to the challenges of not having access to the same level of funding that male founders have. And I can only imagine what it must be like for other groups of people that have even less access than I had. And statistically I'm sort of at 1% of what's available apparently, or what's sort of invested in male investors. So I was really inspired by that concept too.
We've just closed another round of applications in BGV, so it is quite inspiring to read through everyone's brilliant ideas, and just it's amazing to kind of hear the good stories of people trying to make a difference rather than the news can feel a bit overwhelming sometimes. So that's great. This has been really interesting. If there's if anyone wanted to find out anything more about clinical trials or the work you're doing in revolutionising them, where would you signpost them?
Well, first and foremost, our website, www.aparito.com. We're also on social media. And then there are a lot of other sort of organizations, you know, from a pediatrics point of view. There is the C4C, which is Connect for Children, about enabling clinical trials for children across Europe. And then from a rare disease point of view, Erodis have a lot of information there.
I will put all the details of those in the links as well, if anyone is interested. And lastly, what's next for you in Aparito, and how can anyone help?
Yeah, it's really, we're just approaching our 7-year anniversary, as I've mentioned a few times. And it has been some turbulent times, you know, up and down. But I think for the first time in a long time, I feel like we're in a really super exciting, positive place. We've got a phenomenal team in place. We've got such exciting studies and contracts coming through that it's, you know, kind of so exciting to look at the depth and breadth of clinical trials we're now supporting. And so part of the next round will be to go for a Series A investment so that we can focus on expanding our US footprint. A lot of our biotech clients are based in the US, so, you know, we really feel as a huge opportunity there. But also we want to invest more in our video-based analytics. So we've been doing a lot of standardized home-based video assessments and just want to validate some more of the pattern recognition approaches in that. So there'll be the next sort of 6 to 12 months ambitions. And then I'm sure there'll be a few other curveballs thrown our way in the meantime.
That all sounds amazing. Well, that's everything for today. And thank you so much for meeting with me, Elin.
Thank you so much for having me.